I want to talk now a little bit about one example. At the end of September, there was an announcement from ESPN that ESPN is now launching a sub-brand called ESPNW, that is ESPN for Women. And it's unclear yet what form this is going to take, whether or not it's going to be its own network or just kind of an online presence. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the fragmenting or the kind of reskinning of certain brands and trying to focus them down. And, you know, we're in a world now where there are Jewish dating sites and gay television networks and social networks just for Asians and all of that. Do you think we're moving more towards a kind of self-selective defragmentation, or do you think it's still possible to have mass culture experiences?
Well, I think in the case of ESPN, what I didn't see was there are plenty of women who like sports, and I'm sure plenty of them already watch ESPN. And what I saw was that rather than change the dynamic of our core channel and integrate more women and have them doing color commentary and analysis, we would like to prefer keeping things exactly the way they are, and we're going to go put you somewhere else over there so that you stop telling us there aren't enough women.
Yeah, I think ESPN has done a really good job in other areas. So again, as I said, I'm really into basketball. And one of the things that they did that was really smart that I wish we had done on a larger scale at Newsweek, besides on my game blog, where I tried to bring in voices that wouldn't have been published in Newsweek. But in a lot of areas that aren't covered widely by the national media, and even some that are, whether it's sports, whether it's politics, I found that some of the most insightful writing takes place well outside of the mainstream media. And in the case of sports, in the case of basketball, that was definitely true. Like where I find like a lot of the stuff that ends up in the mainstream, it's changing now, I think, because of the influence of sports blogs. But as I got more interested in basketball, it was never going deep enough. It was all very superficial, a lot of pablum, a lot of, you know, both teams played hard kind of crap that just wasn't very interesting. And the blogs were going like much deeper, much further. I could understand the sport a lot better based on that writing. And what ESPN did on basketball, they started their own blog, True Hoop. Well, they actually acquired it. It was existing. It already existed. And then they acquired it. And then they created what they called the True Hoop Network, where they got blogs in each of the cities where there was an NBA team. And so like now they have this like network of very knowledgeable, deep focused people that can be that have their own blogs within the ESPN network that can be surfaced up. So the point of that is, like, I think if they took that similar approach with women, I'm sure I know for a fact there are women who are blogging about sports very knowledgeably. And if they did what they did there, because they took people that would never have shown up on air on ESPN, and now they're on the air, and then they started these ESPN local sites in LA and Dallas and other things, like where now you have daily blog coverage that can tap into the people who appear on air, but have dedicated people, many of whom, or some of whom are local reporters, others came out of the blog community. I think if they took that kind of comprehensive approach, rather than just sort of say like, hey, we're going to put a pink ribbon on some sports coverage and talk about Venus and Serena Williams, I think women's are interested in sports it's much broader than that.
Yeah, I'm conflicted about this because I work for a female spinoff, and I remember when Jezebel was launched, I was a reporter and I thought, why do we need that? And I realized that one of the reasons that Jezebel obviously does something very different from Gawker, which it spun off from, but I couldn't have imagined at the time the fact that it created a situation where there were more women's voices, there were more issues. I mean, every time the New York Times runs a spurious trend piece, we can be out there saying, here's why this is BS. But I do worry about that sort of ghettoization that you talked about, I mean, we have things cross-posted across the network, so maybe a Gizmodo reader ends up on a Jezebel post without realizing it, and then secretly you're kind of infiltrating them with the point of view. But I do kind of worry that also is an excuse for other places to just keep doing what they're doing. And I at least hope that the kind of interlinking and the interactivity of the internet that allows you to cross-post or push back and forth and kind of cross-breed these communities at least makes it less ghettoized.
But there was some rapper or musician that said the world is a ghetto, right? Like, I mean, the Duke Sex list started on Jezebel. Presumably that's a ghetto, and look how big that went.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the whole thing, is like, that's one of the things the internet enables, is something that can start somewhere small off in the corner, like the whole Antoine Dodson video, you know, and all of those things. So I think that's, you hit what you said earlier, or just a second ago, about, you know, room for women's voices. You know, that's the thing, and that's what I think ESPN did with basketball, is they allowed a lot more interesting voices than would have been allowed otherwise. In, you know, airtime is expensive, you know, blog time is much cheaper, and, you know, so even if it starts out as something that's ghettoized, I mean, hip hop started in the ghetto, and, you know, Kanye is what everyone's talking about.
Right,
Yeah,
and if it resonates, then it can get further than that is I think, the next step.
Yeah, and I think ultimately having a small impact that grows into something large forces outlets to pay attention to stories that they might not have picked up on otherwise. I write a lot about fashion. For a long time, fashion was something that started with rich people, and then as you worked your way down the social classes, people would imitate what rich people were wearing. And an interesting thing that started happening in the 20th century was that street fashion became dominant, and that couture designers started copying what people were wearing on the streets and getting their influence from what regular people were wearing. And I like the way that so much of journalism has started to follow a similar trend. If a small site or a big blog like Jezebel or a smaller one like mine picks up a story, it starts to get traction, people read it, and at some point, the more mainstream outlets are kind of forced to respond.
I want to talk a little bit about gaming now. We especially are in an industry where everybody publishes a social media survey once a week. And there's, generally speaking, no new information. It's all very predictable. But one story of the year was kind of the rise of women in gaming, particularly in quote-unquote social gaming. And I want to talk to Ngai about how gaming identity has changed.
Well, I think sites like, I think games are now accessible in more places, in places where women or certain women might have felt somewhat excluded in the past. So for instance, like, you know, let's just look at the last generation, and there were a lot of women who did play games on PlayStation 2 and Xbox. But if you're in a home and your son is playing Halo, or your daughter has friends over and, you know, they're playing DDR, Dance Dance Revolution, that might exclude mom, right? Like, or, you know, grandma or whoever, to sort of get in and sort of play, or maybe they'll join in. But now that you have games popping up on Facebook where, you know, anyone, including women, can access it through their iPhone, their iPad, or their computer at work, or whatever, and that's a space where you can play games. You know, devices like the Wii that were intended to be more social from the beginning, you know, now Microsoft with Kinect and other things. So I think you're seeing, you're seeing games go to places where they're becoming more accessible. They're becoming cheaper. I think a lot of people, you know, if games weren't central to your identity, central to your entertainment identity, then you would balk at spending $60 for a game. Well, Angry Birds doesn't cost $60. You know, give it 2 or 3 years, you may end up spending $60 on it. Some of you may have already spent $60 on Farmville or those kinds of things, but it didn't. The entry fee was not $60, and that's something that keeps a lot of people away.
We're seeing a lot now. The marketing is telling us now that it's all about family gaming. So it's all about especially those kind of Wiimote games where you get the whole family and they're dancing and they're doing sports. I mean, do we have any sense of it? Is that a myth or a reality? Are families really getting together and playing games socially?
I mean, certainly, I mean, you know, the people I follow on Twitter are not necessarily anything to be guided by, but I think a lot of, so I'm 38. There are people who I follow that are young, slightly younger, slightly older, and I heard a lot of them when PlayStation Move came, when the Wii came out, when PlayStation Move came out, Kinect, just talking about the joy and delight of their families playing games with their kids. You know, moms want to be good moms, dads want to be good dads. They want to engage their families. They want a way into their kids' lives, and this stuff is fun. One of the more interesting games on Kinect, which I'm sure those of you who know about Kinect know about, is Dance Central. And I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who ended up working on the game on marketing years ago. We were in a car ride from Vegas to LA after a video game conference, and we started talking about dance games. And she, she's in a dance troupe and, very knowledgeable about dance. And one of the things I said to her, I said, Dance Dance Revolution, the thing that always bothered me, and that game started out being played mostly by guys in arcades, and then I think women got into it as it got into the home. But I was like, you're doing these dance moves that you can get gamer cred for, but you can get absolutely no social cred if you try to go into a club and bust out some DDR moves. Like, you only see that in the movies. That only works as a pickup tactic in the movies. It does not work in real life. I'm not saying whether I know that from personal experience. And I was saying, like, why not create games that are built around real dance moves? Well, finally, you saw that. Actually, Ubisoft did it first with Just Dance for the Wii. And then, MTV Games did it for Kinect, and it's apparently one of the more successful Kinect games. And I think that's a way of engaging women and men in games in a way that's not like, let's just, again, put pink on something and say that's a game for women.
Yeah, and I think building on that also, I think for a lot of families it has to do with they want their kids to be healthier, they want to exercise more, and they're trying to find something that's accessible for their children and for their families. So they think, all right, my kid is on the Wii all day, what can I do with this? And then they get Wii Fit and they try it as a family. And so it's not necessarily that they want to play games for the sake of playing games, but now that there's such a wide option available that they can integrate them into other parts of their lives.
The only thing that I can add to that, not being a gamer myself, is just sort of observing what our readers say about how they feel in gaming spaces. So it seems to me that there, like you said, there have been people in their houses playing games. Some of them are women, teenage girls, older, whatever, people my age. And that when they then try to sort of act on that enthusiasm, I just hear them saying a lot that they feel like maybe only now, maybe it takes like 10 social media surveys to figure out that women are also interested in games, and not, maybe that also includes sorority life, but I think the internet has really enabled them to express the fact that they're there, and they don't want to be marketed to by sexy pinup girls, that they feel like nobody recognizes that they exist. And they can make their voices known now.
When you say you're not a gamer, like, you don't play any games? Like, none? Not even, no Angry Birds, no Cut the Rope, no?
Well, my parents didn't let us have them growing up, so I guess I never got the habit.
Wow, all right.
I would like to say that my dad, he's retired, and he is totally addicted to Farmville.
Oh, I will say this about sorority life, is that I sat next to a guy from sorority life on the plane, and he told me that their core group of people spends, I think the figure was, there are people who spend $10,000 a year on these intangible objects of sorority life, and their clothes and things like that raise your status. And that's how they're profitable, just this core group of people. And obviously, you could buy a lot of real clothes for that amount of money.